For most of my life, I believed I was my thoughts. I wore them like clothes, carried them like burdens, and clung to them like they defined my very existence. If a thought told me I was unworthy, I believed it. If a thought whispered fear, I obeyed it. I never questioned where these thoughts came from or why they held such power over me. It wasn't until I met an old monk on the edge of a mountain temple that everything began to change. I climbed there in search of silence, sore, perhaps, to escape the noise within me. The world below, with its endless opinions, judgments, regrets, ambitions, it had grown too loud. But I didn't realize that the real noise was coming from inside my own head. The monk was sweeping leaves from the stone path when I arrived. His robe was worn, his back slightly bent, but his presence felt like a still lake, untouched by the wind. He didn't ask me why I came. He only smiled and pointed to the bench under a Bodhi tree. We sat in silence for a long time. I thought it would be awkward, but surprisingly, it wasn't. It felt spacious, peaceful, like I didn't need to explain myself. Eventually, I asked, "How do I stop my thoughts? They won't leave me alone." He looked at me and gently said, "Why do you want to stop them?" "Because they're tormenting me," I replied. "They tell me I'm not enough. They bring up mistakes I made years ago. They make me feel anxious, sad, even angry. I don't want to be like this anymore." He chuckled softly and said, "Ah, the thoughts themselves are not your tormentors. It's your belief in them." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He reached into his robe and pulled out a small mirror. "Who is looking?" he asked. I paused. "Me, Ankh." "Who is that?" I couldn't answer. He smiled. "The mind is like a mirror," he said. "It reflects everything: thoughts, emotions, sensations. But the mirror itself is not the reflection. You are the mirror, not what passes through it." Those words lingered in me long after he had gone back to sweeping. That night, I sat in my room and watched my thoughts. They came and went like travelers at a station. One said, "You'll never find peace." Another said, "You're wasting your time." Yet another said, "This monk is just speaking in riddles." And for the first time, I didn't fight them. I didn't argue with them. I just watched. It was like watching birds in the sky. They flew across the canvas of my mind, but they didn't define the sky itself. The next morning, I told the monk about my experience. He nodded. "Thoughts are not you," he said. "They are events. Clouds, not the sky. Waves, not the ocean. But you have tied your identity to them. That is the illusion." He then told me a story about a man who walked through the desert carrying a heavy sack. Inside were stones, memories, regrets, fears. The man believed the sack was part of him, that without it, he would not know who he was. But one day, the sack tore open and the stones scattered. The man panicked. He tried to gather them, but the wind blew them away. Exhausted, he sat down, thinking he had lost everything. But in that moment, he felt something he had never felt before: lightness. That story was me all my life. I had carried a sack filled with thoughts I believed were me. But none of them were permanent. None of them were truly mine. They arose, lingered, and vanished, yet I remained as the days passed at the temple. I began to understand. A thought might say, "I am angry," but who is angry? The thought, feeling, or the one observing it all? When I saw a bird singing, I realized it didn't think I am a singer. It just sang. A tree doesn't think I am tall. It just grows. But I, this human mind, attached labels to everything, especially to myself. I am a failure. I am not lovable. I am brilliant. I am spiritual. Each thought a mask, a layer, a false self. But beneath all of it, there was something still, something aware, something free. One morning, the monk took me to a nearby stream. The water flowed gently over the rocks. He said, "Thoughts are like this water, always moving, always changing, but you are the riverbed, silent, supporting, unseen." But something was different when a thought arose, harsh, judgmental. Loud I smiled. "Ah, there you are." I'd say, "I see you." And just like that, it would lose its grip. Not because I fought it, but because I no longer believed it was me. Over time, I stopped identifying with the highs and lows. I began to live in the space between thoughts, in the stillness that had always been there, waiting. And in that stillness, I found myself, not the self I had built with thoughts, but the one who had been silently watching all along. I remember sitting under the vast night sky, the stars scattered like ancient whispers above me. I had left behind the temple that had become my sanctuary for weeks, but the monk's teachings had followed me like a soft echo in my heart. One question had settled inside me like a seed. What is the mind, really? I wanted to understand, not intellectually, but viscerally, deeply, how the Buddha himself saw the mind. I had read scriptures, listened to discourses, but now I wanted to feel it, so I went inward. The Buddha taught that the mind is like a monkey, leaping from branch to branch, never still, never satisfied. At first, I laughed at the metaphor. It was too simple. But when I watched my own mind, I realized it was devastatingly accurate. One moment, I would be at peace, gazing at a tree. The next, I would remember a careless word from someone years ago, and suddenly, a storm of emotion would rise. Where did it come from? What triggered it? I hadn't summoned it. It had appeared like a gust of wind across a still pond. This was the beginning of my realization that thoughts are not controlled by will. They arise due to causes and conditions. Buddha called this padaka, samoppada dependent. Origination. A thought does not appear out of nowhere. It arises from a chain of subtle causes: memory, perception, sensation, karma, conditioning. I began to observe more carefully. A scent would bring a memory. A memory would stir a thought. A thought would spark an emotion. That emotion would birth more thoughts. And within moments, I'd be trapped inside a storm that had started with the faintest breeze. The mind, I realized, is not a single thing. It is a process, a flow, a stream. Not a container filled with thoughts, but a movement ever fixed. The Buddha often spoke of chitta, the heart-mind. He never separated the emotional from the cognitive. Of the same stream, he likened the untrained mind to a wild horse, fast but unruly. If you held on too tight, it resisted. If you let go completely, it ran wild. But if you rode with awareness, it could take you beyond the mountains. In meditation, I saw this firsthand. I would sit in stillness, and within seconds, the mind would stir. This is boring. You're not doing it right. Shh. The point. Each thought dressed in a different costume, but the same message beneath. Escape the moment. But one day, something shifted. I didn't resist the thought. I didn't follow it. I just observed. It came like a ripple, rose like a wave, and then vanished. There was no violence in its departure, no drama, just silence. And in that moment, I touched something that the Buddha spoke of often: vipassana, clear seeing, the ability to see the nature of thoughts without distortion. They are impermanent, anicca. They are not self, anitta. They are unsatisfactory if clung to. Dukkha. One evening, I sat with an old palm leaf manuscript the monk had given me before I left. On it were the Buddha's words. Just as a man with good eyesight, standing at a crossroads, would see people coming and going, so too the meditator sees thoughts arise, stay a moment, and pass away. That was the nature of mind traffic, not identity. Movement, not essence. I remember a dream I had soon after. In it, I stood before a river. Thoughts floated by like lotus petals Some were beautiful, some were rotting. I bent down to collect the fragrant ones. I recoiled from the decaying ones. But the river kept flowing. Then a voice calm and ancient whispered, "Why cling to any of them when the river itself is not yours?" I woke up with tears in my eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition. The Buddha never told us to destroy the mind or stop all thoughts. That would be like telling the sky not to hold clouds. What he showed us was how to see clearly, to recognize the mind's nature, and through that recognition, be free from its grip. It's easy to believe that the mind defines us, that what we think is who we are. But that's like watching a candle flicker and calling the flame yourself. The flame changes moment, so do thoughts. What remains? The watcher, the awareness. I remember the monk once told me, when the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree, he didn't fight his thoughts, he watched them. Mara came with fear, desire, doubt, but the Buddha simply said, "I see you, Mara." That was his power. Not in slaying demons, but in seeing clearly. In recognizing thoughts as visitors, not truth. Since then, I've made a quiet practice of doing the same. When a thought arises, I greet it. Hello, anger. Welcome, doubt. And just like shadows in the sunlight, they pass, not because I force them away, because I stopped giving them my identity. This is how the Buddha saw the mind, not as a problem to be solved, but as a phenomenon to be understood. Not as something to conquer, but as something to observe with compassion and clarity. And in that observation, liberation begins. There came a moment in my journey when I realized that observing was not enough. Yes, I had begun to witness my thoughts and emotions, but some of them still pulled me under, especially the ones that had been with me for years. Some subtle voices of self-doubt, the lingering grief I had buried, the quiet but constant fear that I was not truly enough. I asked the monk about it on one of my last mornings at the temple. The sky was still gray with mist, and the incense from the prayer hall curled into the cool air. He was sipping tea, calmly, as if time had slowed just for him. "Why do some thoughts still hurt me?" I asked, "even when I know they are just thoughts?" He smiled, but didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed me the teacup. "Hold it tightly," he said. I gripped the cup firmly, tighter. I squeezed until my hand began to ache. "Now," he said softly, "let it go. Just place it down." I set the cup gently on the table. "How do you feel now?" "Relieved," I admitted, rubbing my fingers. "That's the difference," he said. "Observing is seeing the cup. Attachment is holding it too tightly. That one moment changed everything for me. I had been observing, yes, but somewhere deep inside, I was still clinging to the meaning of thoughts, to the story they whispered, to the sense of identity they offered me. It's strange how we can suffer and still cling to the very things that cause the suffering, as if without them we would disappear, as if pain, sadness, worries, those were somehow proof that we existed. But what if freedom didn't come from fighting those feelings, nor from pretending they didn't exist? What if true liberation came from being with them fully without being bound? So I began to sit with my thoughts in a new way. When sadness came, I didn't push it away. I didn't try to replace it with joy or force myself to stay positive. I simply observed a heaviness in the chest, a sinking in the stomach, a certain story repeating in the mind. I would silently say, sadness is here. Not I am sad, but sadness is here. That subtle shift changed everything. It allowed me to witness without becoming, to experience without identification, to feel deeply, yet remain free. This, I began to understand, was what the Buddha meant by upadana, grasping, clinging in. Why, he said, letting go of it was the key to the end of suffering. Thoughts, like fire, are not dangerous by nature. But when we grasp them, when we identify with them, they burn us. There was a moment I still remember clearly. I was meditating one morning, and an old thought surfaced, something someone had said to me years ago that had made me feel humiliated. The memory came with a flush of heat, a rising tension in my throat. My hands clenched. The story played out in my head, word by word. My mind added layers. Why they said it, what I should have done, what I could have said. But instead of spiraling, I simply breathed in out. I whispered to myself, this is just a thought. It's not happening now. It's a ripple. And suddenly, it passed. No argument, no resistance, no forced positivity, only awareness, only space. This is what I began to notice. The more I let go, the more space I felt inside. Space between me and my reactions, between a thought and my identification with it, between emotion and the self who witnessed it. It was like walking through a dense forest and suddenly emerging into an open field. Nothing had changed yet. The monk once told me a story of a traveler who came to a river. The current was strong, and there was no bridge. So the traveler built a raft from nearby wood and used it to cross. When he reached the other side, he was grateful, but then unsure what to do. He picked up the raft and carried it on his back. He walked through towns and mountains, still holding the raft, People asked him why he was burdening himself. He replied, "This raft saved my life. How can I let it go?" We are like that traveler. Our thoughts, beliefs, even our pain, they may have helped us once. They may have protected us. But we carry them long after we've crossed the river. Observing without attachment means honoring what arises, but not mistaking it for who we are. It means allowing space between awareness and content, between consciousness and what passes. Through it, the Buddha didn't ask us to suppress or destroy our humanity. He invited us to be awake within it, to feel but not be enslaved, to think but not be deceived, to love but without fear of losing. And so, I began practicing a simple mantra: let it arise, let it be, let it go. Whether it was joy or sorrow, anger or doubt, I met it like a guest. I offered it presence, not permanence. And with time, my inner world softened, not silent in the sense of nothingness, but quiet in the way a deep forest is quiet, alive but undisturbed. I no longer feared thoughts. They were no longer my enemies, nor my identity. They were just weather, and I was the sky. The freedom I had sought for so long was never about removing thoughts. It was about remembering who I was beyond them, the one who sees, who knows, who simply is dot. And in that realization, I tasted a peace I never thought possible. There was a time when I believed that pain came only from the outside, from other people's actions, from harsh events, from loss. But as I sat more and more with my own mind, I began to see the truth that the Buddha taught over 2,000 years ago. Suffering is born not from life itself, but from how we relate to life through our thoughts. It was an ordinary morning when this realization truly sank in. I was walking along the temple path, the same one I had walked dozens of times. The sky was soft with early light. Birds were singing. But inside me, a storm had begun to rise. A thought had appeared. You've wasted years of your life. It came suddenly, like a sharp wind. I felt my chest tighten. My stomach dropped. The mind picked it up and ran, showing me moments I had failed, opportunities I hadn't taken, people I had let down. But somewhere, amidst the noise, a quiet awareness whispered, "This is suffering. And it's being created right now, by the past, but by the thought." I stopped walking, just stopped, and I breathed in that moment. I remembered the first noble truths, the truth of dukkha, that suffering exists. But I also remembered the second noble truth, that suffering has a cause. And the Buddha said that cause is craving, grasping, clinging, wanting things to be other than they are. In this case, it was not the past that was causing me pain. The past was gone. It was the craving for a different past, the desire to have made other choices. That was the fire. And the thought was just the spark. I had believed for so long that I needed to change my thoughts to be happy. But the Buddha's path offered something simpler and far more powerful: to change my relationship with thoughts, not to control them, not to argue with them, but to see them, understand them, and let them go. That day, I sat with the monk and shared what had happened. He listened, then said something I'll never forget. Thoughts are like seeds. Some grow into flowers, others into thorns. But they only take root if the soil of your mind clings to them. He then shared a teaching I had heard before, but never truly understood until that moment. Whatever has the nature to arise also has the nature to cease. This became my anchor. Every time a painful thought arose, regret, shame, fear, I would remind myself, this too shall pass. Not as a mantra of escape, but as a reflection of truth. I started noticing how certain thoughts only hurt because I gave them importance. A passing comment from someone, a mistake from years ago, a fear about the future, none of these had any power on their own. It was my attachment, my inner resistance, that turned them into suffering. So I began practicing letting go. Not in a dramatic way, not by forcing thoughts out of my mind, but gently, like opening a clenched fist. When a thought of self-judgment arose, I didn't argue with it. I just labeled it judgment. When fear came, I labeled it fear, and I let it pass like clouds in the sky. At first, it felt unnatural. I was so used to engaging, reacting, defending. But over time, something softened. I started experiencing thoughts like passing weather, sometimes stormy, sometimes bright, but never permanent. The Buddha taught a powerful tool for this: mindfulness, sati. The simple act of being fully aware in the present moment without judgment. I practiced it while eating, walking, breathing. I practiced it with every thought that arose, and slowly the grip loosened. Thoughts still came. Of course they did, but they no longer controlled me. There was one evening I remember vividly. I was alone, sitting under a banyan tree. A familiar thought visited me, one that always whispered, "You're not enough." For years, I had tried to argue with it, prove it wrong, drown it in affirmations. But this time, I just smiled. "You again," I said silently. "I see you." And then I did nothing. I didn't push it away. I didn't feed it. I simply let it be. And within moments, it faded. Not because I defeated it, but because I didn't feed it. That was the secret. The Buddha didn't promise that negative thoughts would vanish forever. He taught that liberation comes from non-attachment, from not clinging to what arises in the mind. To let go doesn't mean to reject. It means to no longer hold on. It means to trust that the mind can be a sky, vast and spacious, where even storms can pass without leaving. A mark, it means to rest in awareness, not in identity. It means to suffer less, not because life changes, but because our grip on it does so now. When pain arises, I don't ask, why is this happening? I ask, am I clinging? And if I am, I breathe, I return to the moment. I let go. Again and again, not perfectly, but gently, patiently, like leaves falling from a tree. And in that falling, I find peace. There was a morning unlike any other, not because the world had changed, but because I had. The sky looked the same, soft and pale with dawn. The wind moved through the trees with the same gentle hush. Birds sang, leaves shimmered, monks chanted. Somewhere in the distance, but within me, something had stilled. No thoughts were pulling me forward. No past was dragging me back. I was simply here, present, breathing. It took me years to arrive in that single moment, and yet it had always been available. All this time, I had been living in the mind as if it were a house I could never leave. Thoughts were the rooms, emotions, the windows, memories, the furniture. I decorated it, rearranged it, sometimes even tried to demolish parts of it, but I never truly stepped outside. The mind had been my identity, my prison, and my story. But now, after observing, understanding, and slowly letting go, I had begun to experience something beyond it, a quiet, not the silence of absence, but the fullness of presence. It was not a silence that came from shutting out the world, but from not reacting to it. A silence that stood in the middle of sound, untouched. A silence that felt more like myself than any thought ever had. This is what I had heard the monk speak of, what I had read in the scriptures, but never truly tasted until now. Freedom beyond thought. I once asked the monk, what is left when the mind becomes still? He looked at me kindly and said, only everything. It sounded poetic at the time, but now I understand. When the mind quiets, the world returns, not distorted by stories or judgments, but alive in its raw, sacred simplicity. A cup is just a cup. A face is just a face. A breath is just a breath. And yet, in that simplicity, there is a kind of awe, a deep gratitude that rises for no reason at all. This is living beyond the mind, not escaping it, but no longer being ruled by it. There are still thoughts, of course. They arise like waves on the surface of a vast ocean. But now I dwell in the depth beneath. I no longer mistake the ripples for the whole sea. Sometimes a thought will try to lure me back. You should be doing more. You need to figure everything out. What if something goes wrong? But these voices no longer convince me. They are echoes of an old identity I no longer wear. I have learned that presence isn't something we achieve. It's something we return to, something we remember. It was always here beneath the noise, beneath the restlessness, beneath the thinking. All I had to do was stop grasping, stop resisting, stop becoming and just be in being. There is no future to fear, no past to regret, no identity to protect. There is only this breath, this step, this gaze, this silence. The Buddha called this tathos sukhness. The truth of things as they are, before the mind colors them. I see it now when I drink tea and notice the warmth, when I sit in the garden and feel the breeze, when I look into someone's eyes. Without needing to be anyone, there is a great stillness that flows beneath all things. I don't create it. I only uncover it when I stop chasing the mind's illusions. That stillness has become my teacher. Sometimes I walk without direction, just to feel the earth beneath my feet. Sometimes I sit by a window and let the sunlight fall on my skin. Sometimes I watch people talking, laughing, arguing, and I feel a soft compassion arise, not because I am above them, but because I remember how tightly I once held on to Dot. Now I hold nothing. And in that emptiness, I feel whole. I once feared that if I let go of all thoughts, if I stopped building a self out of ideas, I would become nothing. But I was wrong. I didn't become nothing. I became free. There is a joy that doesn't depend on any event, a peace that doesn't need perfect conditions, a love that isn't attached to any person. It arises from being, not from thinking, and so I live now not in escape from the world, but in intimacy with it. I speak when words are needed. I rest when silence is sweeter. I listen more than I respond. I no longer strive to understand everything. Some things are meant to be felt, not explained. Some truths come only in stillness. Some wisdom is born only in silence. The monk used to say, before enlightenment, the mind is like a wild dog chasing shadows. After enlightenment, it lies down peacefully under the same sun. I think I know what he meant now. The thoughts still come. The world still moves. But I no longer chase the shadows. I sit beneath the sun, and in that radiant stillness I live.